A Sunday, June the 30th, 2024. Not a day that we normally do. That was the week, our summary of tech news, but it's a special Sunday, at least according to Keith Tier, who's my partner in the tech roundup of the week. I'm quoting Keith's editorial this week. It's Sunday, 2 days later than I usually send this out. Two excuses. I was in recovery from PTSD after the quote-unquote debate. And then I almost had a relapse watching England in the Euro last 16 game against Slovakia. I'm unsure of my mental state now. We won 2-1, we, I guess, being England in extra time. But the other more important quote-unquote game is still decided. And that game, Keith, is AI, right?
Correct. It's a big game as well.
Well, your England team, they should be really proud of themselves. They beat Slovakia. That's quite an achievement, isn't it?
Well, given that they were losing 1-0 until the 94th minute, I think I'm going to ignore your implied joke and say, yes, it is an achievement. And it was a great bicycle kick from Bellingham. I always want to call him Sheringham.
Sheringham played for both Manchester United and Tottenham. I have to admit, I'm a former Englishman when it comes to football, but you've clearly clung to your identity, Keith. I'm surprised that you've been living in Palo Alto for so long and you haven't emancipated yourself of this tribalism. You're the most internationalist fellow I know. How can you still care about how England does in football?
It's ironic, isn't it? I tell my Argentinian friends that I'll agree with them that Las Malvinas Argentinas, but when it comes to soccer, I'll spill every last bit of blood to try to beat them.
Well, the other thing you brought up before we get to tech and AI is the debate. What did you make of that? Was it a debate or a debacle?
You know, my wife kind of shaped my thinking because she said something very prescient. She was super angry watching it. And I said, you know, why so angry? And she said, I can't believe that the senior Democratic Party people allowed Biden to stand when they must know for sure this is how he is, or at least can be.
Yeah.
And so you've just got to wonder who's running the Democratic Party and how are decisions made, because this seems like, even from the point of view of the Biden family, setting him up for that is terrible. I mean,
yeah, and actually, not that I'm a particularly big fan of Trump, but it definitely gives their argument that the country is run by these unaccountable elites some credibility. Clearly having the most powerful blah blah country in the world being run by a man who can barely put a sentence together, who wouldn't be out of place in an old age home is embarrassing.
It's super embarrassing. And, you know, our normal narrative on this show, I try to persuade you that America's in relative decline. If you ever needed evidence, it's a country that has these two as candidates.
What's worse, Keith, the English football team or Joe Biden?
I say the English football team and the American establishment in general. It's not just Biden. It's across both parties. It's the elite that run politics and, to some extent, economics, have no ambition, no belief, no vision. And it's really just...
So if you put Joe Biden, if you replaced Harry Kane or Bellingham with Joe Biden, would it make much of a difference to the English team? Or in reverse, if Harry Kane became president of the US, I don't think it would make much difference, would it?
No, but if you do it the other way around, there's no way Biden's doing a bicycle kick to score a goal in the 94th minute. At least Bellingham could do that.
Well, that could be virtual, and that's perhaps where AI comes in. Let's get beyond Trump and the English football team, two rather boring subjects. Is there an AI bubble, Keith? That's the title. Judging from the poor quality of this AI art, there is one. You always have this AI art, and it seems to get worse every week. So we've touched on this many times over the last couple of years since the OpenAI eruption. Why this week? Why do you ask, is there an AI bubble?
Well, there's a really good essay by Peter Walker from Carter that pretty much asked that question. Carter is the company that manages the share tables for a lot of private companies. I mean, a real lot of private companies, tens of thousands. And so Peter has access to anonymous data about things like the valuations that funding is
And he
being.
described this character, Peter Walker, describes himself as a data storyteller, whatever that means.
Yeah, and by the way, he's super good. I mean, there are a bunch of people. Andrew Ratcherath is in this week's, who runs Data Driven VC. There's a bunch of people who are trying hard to be the font of wisdom when it comes to data and venture capital. I think Peter Walker is first amongst peers, just because of his access to data. He just has fantastic data.
So, what is Walker doing? The link in the newsletter this week is to his LinkedIn posting. What is Walker doing that hasn't been done before in terms of asking or answering whether or not there's an AI bubble? Because it seems to many people, including myself, that there is one, but maybe that's meaningful, maybe it isn't.
I think he implies that there is without saying so. What he's doing is he measures the valuation of companies at their A round, and an A round used to be the first time a company raised the money. Back in the day, your first funding was called an A round. These days, an A round is usually about the third time a company has raised money. And the valuation ranges, he breaks them down into percentiles, that is to say clusters, if you will. And the 50th percentile, companies are valued at around $40 million, 44, I think it is. And at the 95th percentile, they're valued over $200 million. So that's the spread between the middle and the highest. And he says that's the widest spread ever. He looks back in history 5 years. That's what he's got data for. And says even in the crazy 2021 period and 2022, it wasn't as wide as this.
So what number there is significant? The ceiling or the floor?
The ceiling. The fact,
and that's what, 200. So the average, so that at the high end, the average Series A is 200 million valuation. And for him, how does that compare historically?
Historically, you can see it in the chart. I don't know if you have it, but in the chart, you'll see there's a range. If you scroll down, you're not showing a browser, are you? So you can't.
No, but it's in the newsletter.
Yeah, it's in the newsletter. Basically, the range is usually far narrower. Firstly, the gap between 44 and 200 is very big. Normally, it's more likely between 30 and 60, something like that. And why is the gap so wide? Because there's a small number of companies at the high end raising huge sums. And the implication is those are mainly AI companies. And that tells you that insofar as there are high valuations, and there are the highest ever, so this correction doesn't exist in the 95th percentile.
But also for AI, and we've talked about this before, to be an AI company, especially one like Perplexity or one of these other more ambitious companies, and Anthropic, you have to be valued in the billions to even begin to play in this space. So why does that suggest there's a bubble?
So let's come back to the bubble question, because I don't think there is a bubble in some ways as well. But I do think the facts are important. Remember, these are Series A's. So companies like Perplexity and the names that everyone would be familiar with, they're already doing Series B, C, and D's.
Right.
So these are much earlier, these companies. You've probably never heard of most of them yet. These are the companies some of whom will be big names next year. And so to be valued at 200 million when no one's even ever heard of you is all about the promise of what might be.
And we know that those are the kind of companies that are founded by entrepreneurs with track records. So it's not just a couple of kids in a garage somewhere who are being valued at 200 million, is it?
There'll be some of those, Andrew. I mean, I'm not so cynical that the value doesn't still back outliers. I think it does. So there will be some of those. But yeah, you're right. A lot of them will be second or third time entrepreneurs as well, who are known quantities.
And does this reflect competition amongst VCs? The reason why we have a ceiling at 200 million valuation for Series A is because there's a feeding frenzy amongst VCs?
You could call it a feeding frenzy, but I mean, the normal way to talk about it would be to acknowledge that some of these companies are going to be worth at least billions, if not more. So what they're really doing is competing to own equity in possible future outbreaks. And there's a price of entry set by everyone. And if you're not prepared to pay the price or don't have the capital to pay the price, you're not going to end up owning that company's equity. So yes, in a way, you're right. On the other hand, what else could they do in a competitive?
One of the things you've always educated me on, Keith, when it comes, because you really have become an expert in this area, is if there's a lot of cash around, the fact that you're valuing Series A's at a high point at 200 million over 150 or 100 million doesn't really matter, does it?
What matters more is what percentage of a company you own. If you know, it's a lot better to own 20% than 10, and it's a lot better to own 10 than 2. So Y Combinator, for example, always owns 7% initially, which is a small number. So, you know, some of the more aggressive early stage investors like to target 15 to 20% ownership. So the minute you're getting raising 200 million, you're almost a unicorn right there, by the way. If you're raising 200 million, you're probably a unicorn.
Well, a unicorn on paper, we've had this conversation. So
all unicorns are on paper. There is no such thing as a unicorn not on paper.
So OpenAI is a unicorn as well, but we know it's more than on paper. It actually is worth more than $1 billion, even if they haven't gone public.
They've got enough revenue to suggest that they're worth 20 to 30 billion.
Yeah. At least you've suggested more. So there are other articles along with the Peter Walker piece. MG Siegler made his name at TechCrunch. He was hired by Mike Arrington. You note that in your editorial. What does he writes about the Surface laptop review, Microsoft's new product? What's this got to do with AI and the bubble?
Well, the best quote in this piece is Microsoft shit their pants in bed or something like that.
This is a family show, Keith. Are we allowed to say that?
I think he said Microsoft shit the bed. And that was correlated to the AI component of this new Surface Pro. Just to give people who don't know context, the Surface Pro is that Microsoft laptop with a kind of a cloth keyboard that folds up, or you can take it off and use it as a tablet as well. It looks very nice, but it has been an underperformer in terms of compared to Apple.
To put it politely.
This new one apparently gets close to being as good as an Apple M1, and it does it using a new chip from Qualcomm called Snapdragon. I forget the number, but it's the most recent in the Snapdragon family. And it's got a separate processor for neural networks, just like Apple does, and so on. So the reputation of this new one is it's caught up with Apple. And then what Siegler does, he explains how it really hasn't, because Microsoft don't have the confidence to ship the AI software that would make it, you know, interesting, which is called Copilot.
Nor does Apple, really, does it? I mean,
they don't either. And in fact, both of them are running scared of regulation, either in Europe or here.
Understandably, given how vulnerable they are.
Right. So now, you know for sure, people who are scared of regulation aren't going to be the ones who change the world. In a way, it's good for OpenAI that these two are so sheepish, because in order to make things happen, you really have to behave like Uber did in the early days.
But what about that link, Keith, I sent you earlier this week from Mustafa? Is it the new head of AI at Microsoft, who suggests that anything on the web is free. If it's on the web, it can be included in AI. Isn't that doesn't sound very sheepish?
Yeah, well, he's not, you know, if Microsoft is the Borg, Mustafa is still 90% in the Starship Enterprise. He hasn't fully been incorporated yet into the Microsoft way of thinking. So he's a bit of an outlier, but I will guarantee his bosses won't like the fact that he
But his
said
boss
that.
is the CEO.
Yeah, and his boss won't like the fact that he said that
So
because
basically, what Siegler is saying is that for all this talk of AI and all these new pieces of hardware, it's all again, if not a bubble. It's just there's just nothing there. The emperor has no clothes.
well, no, there is a bubble in early stage funding, although I always make the point, and I think you agree with this, that a bubble is a natural reaction to opportunity. Money
It's
flows.
inevitable. I mean, it's unavoidable. And
Yeah.
lots of economists suggest that the real foundations of technological innovation lies in bubbles because when they pop, some companies survive, and that's when you get the real interesting building. The real issue is, are we sick of AI? Since this isn't a family show, since you've been swearing, Keith, there's another piece I'm quoting. It's not my words. I will fucking pile drive you if you mention AI again. Do we have to keep on hearing about AI? What does this piece suggest?
So this is an Australian techie who works in AI, sounding off from the point of view of a techie about how when uneducated people who don't really know what they're talking about keep proselytizing AI without even knowing what it is. And a pile drive, for those who don't know, is when you turn someone upside down in a wrestling match and bang their head on the floor. So it's not a nice.
That seems to be the normal behavior in Australia, isn't it?
After a few Fosters, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, but so the article is saying, please shut up. It's not a very good article, by the way. I put it in because it got a lot of attention and was reposted and discussed a lot. So I put it in just so my readers are aware that it exists. It's not really very intelligent. It's just sounding off.
It is a bit boring. But on the other hand, these questions keep on coming up. As one piece you linked to from Wired, which is a credible magazine, Perplexity is a bullshit machine. You've always spoken up Perplexity. It's the most credible AI search engine. Is Perplexity just scraping the web? Is it a bullshit machine?
You know, this goes along with a second article about is there such a thing as an AI search engine? I can't remember the exact title.
What, if anything, is AI search good for by Adam Clark Estes in Vox.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I mean, search for me is quite adequate. I don't need AI. And anyway, even Google AI, even Google search is built on a kind of AI.
AI is this word we use for large language models. It's kind of almost become reduced down to large language models. And large language models are really no good for search. They're not. They're pretty good for knowledge, as long as you're aware that they sometimes hallucinate and you're critical enough to read what's said and think about it. They're really, really good at knowledge. They're actually good at stopping you searching. So if you try to apply large language models to search, it probably isn't going to work. And the Wired story is exposing the fact that Perplexity actually isn't really applying AI to search. What it's actually doing, in the words of Wired, is plagiarizing articles by
quote Wired, surreptitiously, or maybe not so surreptitiously, stealing content.
Scraping and stealing. Now, you know, you need to have a nuanced discussion about this because Google's index is built from crawling the web and indexing every single word. So that is a form of scraping, and it indexes the scraping.
Are you suggesting that Google is a big thief, Keith? I'm going to report you to my wife.
Well, Google is both a thief and a utility at the same time because it has enough users that the traffic it sends back to you is worth giving it access, you know, to your content.
Google is much less vulnerable in court than Perplexity, which is clearly stealing content to add to its
I don't know. That goes back to Mustafa's point, which is it really stealing if what it's actually doing is indexing and then feeding it back in a search context, by the way, and linking to you? What is there really any difference between Bing, Google, and Perplexity? Perplexity's got a nice user interface. It does actually plug in ChatGPT and other ones into the interface, so there's more choice into how to deal with the results. But at the level of how does it get its data and what does it do with it, surely plagiarizing is better than obfuscating.
So there's two issues here. On the one hand, you said earlier that that the most innovative companies are pirates and that they break things and break the law. So in a sense, you're suggesting that Perplexity is more innovative certainly than Microsoft or Apple. On the other hand, you're suggesting that Perplexity's attempt to turn AI into search is rather like the pioneers of television who tried to put radio onto television. So which is true? Or are they both simultaneously true about Perplexity?
I actually don't really rate Perplexity in the long run. I think it's opened people's eyes to some possibilities. And I do expect that some of the things you see on Perplexity will survive as user interface.
You don't use Perplexity as search?
Rarely.
So what do you, and you and I have talked about this a lot. Do you basically use AI now for programming? Is that the core value for you?
You know, yes, for those who are listening and want to, if you go to search.signalrank.ai, you'll find a website that's a search engine. And I built it this week using ChatGPT and Claude.
Okay, so it has some value maybe in that sense. I can't comment. I'm not a programmer. But elsewhere, I don't personally see any evidence that this thing has very much value. We'll come to it at the end where Malik is using it to write and take photographs. But I have to admit, I'm not convinced. Meanwhile, Keith, let's talk about some other stuff. It's not just AI this week. Interesting piece by Alex Wilhelm. You've referenced him, linked with him before. Why the IPO I'm most excited about isn't Databricks, who we've talked about, or Stripe. We've talked about them many times. But Circle. We haven't talked about Circle much. Do you share Wilhelm's optimism about Circle?
I know why he likes them. Circle is run by a gentleman called Jeremy Allaire.
Yeah, he's been around a while. He's been around the block many times.
He was the original creator of Macromedia. Did Macromedia Director, which was the first kind of animated web and led to Flash, for example. So yeah, he's been around a while. He then did a video startup, and Circle is the company that brought what's called USDC into the world. USDC is a stable coin in the crypto world that is backed by actual assets, billions of them, and makes interest on those assets, a lot of interest, and so has a very big revenue stream simply by being, if you like, the central bank that everyone can cash into and out of when they buy, Bitcoin.
And they filed privately to go public earlier this year. Does that suggest that the Web3 crypto economy is still alive?
Oh, it's very much alive. It's a parallel economy. It hasn't really broken into the mainstream yet, except as an investment asset. So you can now buy Bitcoin and pretty soon Ethereum on the stock exchange with the approval of the SEC through exchange traded funds and the like. So it's broken through as an investment asset, but hasn't really broken through product wise. And I think the jury's out on whether it will. You need some super smart product people to build things that people will use.
So to go back to Walker's piece about IPO, about Series A, did he break down crypto versus AI? I mean, is the smart money perhaps now going back into crypto?
Some of it is. He includes crypto in SaaS, and this article is all about SaaS. So it is in there, but he didn't break it out. If you go and look at his LinkedIn, he does actually break out the different sectors in some of his earlier posts. So you can go and find it there. But crypto is the poor cousin of AI right now. AI is attracting most of the capital.
Well, speaking of capital and valuations, your startup of the week is Webtoon. It rose modestly in its IPO debut. Tell us about Webtoon. Is this something we should be excited about?
Well, Webtoon is like Substack, but for cartoonists. And it's got a long history, by the way. It was founded in Korea way back, and it's 70% of it is owned by Naver, which is its Korean parent company. And of course, Asia and manga go together very closely. And Korea is a country where cartoon as an art form is culturally important. So it's not surprising that it came out of Korea. It could have come out of Japan just as easily, or even China. It's Korean, and it is the world's marketplace for anyone who is a cartoonist who wants to sell their cartoons or have people look at them and earn money from them being looked at. So it's a company that could really only exist in the age of the internet. Its revenues are very high, around about 300 to 400 million a year. So it's not a small company.
Sounds almost like a Web1 company.
It's close to a YouTube for cartoons, yeah.
Refreshingly, there's no AI there and there's no crypto. This is a real company, real product, real demand.
Yeah, it's a marketplace, which is one of the categories of the internet that does very well.
So we should celebrate this. I mean, no one's going to get seriously rich with Webtoon, are they?
Well, I think Naver, the parent company, is, but they're already seriously rich, so we can't get too excited about that.
So why do you choose it as your startup of the week?
I think it's got a story that shows you that good companies can still go public. They don't have to be the coolest thing on the block or new.
Well, finally, the X of the week by one of your favorite tech commentators, a man who needs no introduction in our show, Om Malik, at Om. And we have a photo of a camera, odd-looking camera. And he writes, serendipity is what makes San Francisco special. Technologies, new ideas, and people collide randomly in the oddest of places at oddest of times. I was reminded of this when walking in the park playing with Poetry Camera. What's Poetry Camera? Is this the device that we see?
Yeah, so this is a 3D printed, handmade device. The person who did it's a friend of ours. And what this guy has done is he's given the camera the ability to write a poem based on what it sees through the lens. And so it doesn't actually take pictures. It writes poems from what it sees. So hence the poetry camera. And it prints them out. It's got a little printer inside, like, a till receipt. So it's completely weird. But I thought it was really interesting just because the imagination puts things together that no product team would ever come up with.
Although Canon's been talking and the other large camera manufacturers have been promising, threatening to put AI into their products. Is this the kind of way in which AI, and we've used that word carefully, could be included in hardware from Canon or Sony?
Well, they already are included in things like this camera I'm using now. It's got a little square that I can see that's focused on my eyes, and it's using AI to make sure I keep in focus because it knows where my eyes are. And if I duck down, it'll focus on the background. And if I stand up again, it'll focus on me, and that's AI. But this is a different kind of AI. This is more like artistic or creative AI in the world, in the physical world. Imagine if that camera had legs and arms and could move around and had a microphone and a speaker, and it was a robot speaking the poems, which is not very far-fetched. There's an article in this week's newsletter about robotics investments, which are on the up and up. We're approaching the age of robotics very rapidly now.
And this could go the other way. You could have products that take text and turn them into photographs.
Yeah, well, yeah, as you've noted, Andrew, the results are.
Well, I think that's probably a bad reflection on you. I can't believe that AI art is always quite as bad as yours, but that
I thought this one was quite good. I mean, the fact that it spelled the words correctly,
it didn't spell the words natural networks. What's a natural network?
you can't see that word, but is there an AI bubble is properly rendered?
Well, that's quite an achievement.
Yeah.
Is there an AI bubble? Remarkable achievement.
Well, any of you who use these things know that the text is almost always garbled.
There is a bubble, Keith. The more I talk to you, the more I think there's a bubble. What does Ohm think? He writes about, as a writer, borrowing from AI to create poetry. Does he find it useful? He's hard-headed, somewhat skeptical.
I think the answer's both. The subtitle of this week's newsletter is yes and no. It says answer : yes and no. So there is a bubble, but also there isn't insofar as saying there's a bubble in Silicon Valley is like saying there's an opportunity. It's not a negative statement. There's no pejorative implied.
I mean, the reality is in Silicon Valley, there's always a bubble. And when there isn't one, then it's no longer Silicon Valley.
Exactly. It means nothing interesting is happening. So there you go. And I think the people who read the newsletter know that. So there's no news there. But sometimes you have to hold the line in the face of, the England manager had to do this. In the last, England had played 3 games in the Euros, and everyone's calling for the manager to be fired. And he's been saying, I don't care. And today, in the 94th minute, he went from the last 16 to the quarterfinals with an overhead kick and a Harry Kane header. And funnily enough, the commentators before the goal were saying this manager sucks. Why doesn't he put on his substitutes? As soon as the goal was scored, the commentator said, he's a genius. He still has 3 substitutes left. So now you know that you've got to stand firm in the face of the BS, even if people threaten to pile drive you.
Yeah, which is an unpleasant Australian term. Finally, Keith, to go back to the beginning, we'll talk again next week. What is more likely, England win the Euros or Joe Biden decides not to run?
Ooh, I think England winning the Euros is more likely. I don't believe Joe Biden has it in him to decide not to run. And I don't believe the Democratic Party has it in them to persuade him not to run. But he